قل إن كنتم تحبون الله فاتبعوني يحببكم الله ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم والله غفور رحيم.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وارزقنا فهم النبيين وحفظ المرسلين. اللهم افتح لنا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الكرام ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We are in session 18, alhamdulillah. And I want to start, inshallah, by doing a little bit of theology before we go back into the seerah, because there was a question that was asked in the group regarding the Arabs and how they tend to all the time say wallahi and mention the name of Allah, and how many of them, their names are also including like Abdullah, for example. So what does that mean? Because we have been told that these individuals were pagans and they were polytheists. They were mushrikun. They worshipped other gods. So why do they keep mentioning Allah? What does that mean in terms of, is it just a name, or do they actually believe that there is Allah? So I'm going to try and make this as brief as I can without going too deep into the science and the subject of theology. So just bear with me, and if you have questions, inshallah, I'll address them during the session later on. Now, it's important to understand here the terminology, right? Because we're dealing with this in the English language, and in the Arabic, it was something that was already pretty much understood. So when you see them speaking about this in the seerah and whatnot, especially in the Arabic text, the early scholars doing their recording and all that, they did not give it too much attention, because it's something like, the Arabs consider something that's already ma'loom. They don't bother mentioning it again. It's like being redundant. If something is already evident, you don't mention it or keep on reiterating it. But when it comes to the English language and really the level of education we have today compared to what they had at their time, some of these things need to be reiterated and really properly defined. So it's important to remember that there's a difference between polytheism and atheism. Even though collectively they would both be placed in the category of kufr, of kafirun. So this kafirun will include those who are worshipping other gods and multiple gods, and will also include those who do not worship God at all. But in ilm al-kalam, there is a specificity to either of these. One will be called the mushrikun, the mushrik. The other one will be called the mulhid, who is the atheist. And the difference between the two is that the mushrik will worship other entities, but the belief of God is not altogether removed. So he does believe in God, he's just believing in the wrong God. That's the mushrik. Whereas the atheist, the belief of God in and of itself is completely removed, right? So some people, certain groups of people in the past, in history, they held the belief, though they were mushrik, they held the belief that there was one supreme God, a higher deity who's set above all the others in this hierarchy of power and might and dominance over the rest of creation. This was like the creator, the supreme creator of all things, including those gods who fell, below this god in hierarchy. So here, the object of polytheism is association, which is now denoted by the term shirk, which comes from the root of sharika, and sharika meaning to associate or to connect, to link, to correlate and combine multiples to accompany them, either at the same level or in a hierarchy of sorts, but to still give it a sort of same designation, or to put them in the same category, or to group them together in the same general or genus, or some such. So it may not necessarily be at the same level. Maybe it is hierarchical, but it's still in the same group of what you would call gods, whereby from the Arab perspective, for them it was Allah, and then they had all these others. So they still believed in this higher deity, this higher God. They just had others, who are of a lower quality in that group, but they grouped them together as gods. Now, Tawḥīd, when it comes in as a counterpoint to both the polytheistic position as well as the atheistic position. Tawḥīd comes in as a counter to both the multiplicity of it and the complete negation of it. But it is not simply the idea of making one in terms of quantity, to say that it's just one God, in terms of just quantity, meaning it's not 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, it's just one. It's not quantitative in that sense. This Tawḥīd is really the realization of a singular and absolute unity that in and of itself is above and beyond both quantity and quality. This is a very important statement. It's my own, but you should write this down if you can, and just keep this in mind. Tawḥīd is the realization of a singular and absolute unity that in and of itself is above and beyond both quantity and quality. Because quantity and quality are proponents of this created domain. And when we speak about God, by definition, God does not belong to the created domain, because he's the creator. The creator is not part of the creation, you see? Neither does he have an extension into creation, nor is creation a component that is partitive of him. He is distinct from creation. He is the creator, and then there is creation. This is very important. This is the Islamic position. The position of Islam, this is where the distinction is made. Whereas in other denominations, you'll find some kind of variation, right? Like the Christian will say, no, okay, so God entered into creation. He sent his only son, that's the same. Is the God figure, and then they talk about personification. So this is where it now, shirk now comes into these kinds of qualifications, these distinctions here. One of them is personification, and the other is multiplication. Okay, and in Surah Al-Ikhlas, that's the first thing that is negated by the first ayah in Surah Al-Ikhlas. Surah Al-Ikhlas begins, "Qul huwallahu ahad." That statement, huwallahu ahad, that negates both personification and multiplication, i.e., he as God does not have multiple personalities that he can send out. Okay, and he is not a composition of multiple separate entities into one. The human being, you as the human being, you and I, we can split personality. We can show one face here and another face over there. We can be one profile at work, a different profile in a wedding, a different profile at home. You see, we can do that. That's a split personification. You're taking on a persona. Okay, but God does not qualify for any of those. He is not personified in any form, and he has got no multiplicity. Now, personification, you will see this most pronounced in Christianity and in Judaism also, especially among these radical factions of Judaism and the early factions of the Jews. There is something similar to that also in Hinduism, in Roman, in Greek and Nordic cultures, even in the Persian Zoroastrianism. It is the idea that God has a form. That's in a nutshell. Personification is the idea that God has a form, and then that form is sort of acknowledged through his extension, and then is thus worshipped through that extension. So because he is too mighty for our comprehension and our understanding, this is the idea. I'm telling you what the polytheistics, this is their rationale, is that he's too high and mighty, and so he sends in some aspect of his nature. It then personifies into something that we can relate with. So for the Christian mind, it is his only begotten son through whom we can relate. You see, for the Hindu, it will be, Krishna or something like that, which, or a statue of that Krishna or something that he can relate with. For the Zoroastrians, it was the fire. You see, that was the might of it, the power of God personified in the created domain. Now, this by necessity in and of itself becomes shirk, right? Because as an axiomatic quality of God, as an attribute, if you speak about God and you say, what are his attributes? His foremost attribution is that he has no personification. He is his own person. He's not going to take on the form of something. Why should he do that when he can be his own self as God? Whereas his bearing he bears no similarity to anything in creation. Laysa kamithlihi shay'un. He has no similarity to anything in creation. So, and therefore he cannot be personified into anything within creation. So the moment that is done to him, it already becomes part of shirk, because it reduces his stature as God, creator, into God with like a small g, part of creation. That's the personification portion. The other way that they do it is through multiplication. This is found now in the Arabs, and also among the Greeks, the Romans, the Nords, and then up until today, you still have the Hindu who still do this. I think they're the only ones who do it, though you might include the Buddhists in that category as well, and some of the lesser religious factions, such as in the Americas and other parts of the world. In this category, what happens is that the oneness of God is subjected to a kind of a division in terms of attributes. And then those attributes are then given form. They sort of become offshoots of that higher power. And they don't disintegrate the idea completely. They still retain that supreme being, but then each sort of personification that they give it, meaning they break it down and then they personify each attribute, each of those becomes a deity now. as if it were a kind of an approved representative of or an advocate on behalf of God for you to interact with. This association, I mean, this kind of thing is obviously it's a fabrication, because nothing of such comes in from above as revelation to do that. So this is something that human beings come up with, and it's a kind of a justification to say, you know what, we are human beings and we are not worthy to interact with God directly, so we need a kind of an intercessor, something, an object to which we can communicate with, and that communicate then acts like a sort of a relay, then transfers that communication into the heavens. So you see this, for example, with the Mesopotamians, they had the god Anu, which was a sort of an idolization of it, right? You have Odin to the Nords. You had Zeus to the Greeks. You have Bhagwan Ram to the Hindus, plus whatever are the 3 million extensions that they have of that. You had Ahura Mazda to the Zoroastrians, the Persians. And to the Arabs now, it was Allah. See? So that Godhead remains above them. And by the way, not just to the Arabs, also to many of the other Middle Eastern and Semitic groups, the Assyrians and the Levantines, they all maintained that. And to the Jews also, by the way, the Jews also had the idea of, because they did have a kind of idol worshipping during those gaps when they didn't have prophets. And in some cases, even when they had prophets, they did that. So if you look at some of the Judaic history, they do have some idols that they used to worship also. For the Arabs, they took on a more of the second type of polytheism, meaning they didn't really go for the personification aspect, they went more for the multiplication aspect. The personification is that God comes down to an earthly domain and takes on a persona with which humans can relate with. So this is where the Christian really went astray. But the Arabs, they didn't do that. They maintained the higher deity of God, of Allah, and then his attributions were what were given now personifications. And so there are these multiplications that took, okay, so you had like Hubal, who was the god of this and that, and then you have Allah, the god of that, and then you had so and so, these were all abridgments. But they retained that belief in Allah as the highest. They just did not know how to relate with that Allah as the highest. They didn't have a Sharia, and they had no, fixed creed or millah. That basically lost the millah of Ibrahim. So they didn't have anything to follow up with that. And so all they had were their own sort of priests who would tell them how to worship in front of, Allat and Al-Uzza and Hubal and all these other idols in and around the Kaaba. And these were presented as sort of intercessors and mediators. And these intercessors and mediators were seen as, something that was necessary for a people to whom, arguably, there had been no prophetic tradition since Ibrahim and Ismail. And they had nothing, in record to follow. So they basically, went astray. But it wasn't always like that. It actually started in a much more recent interim of their history. In this almost 1500 year gap between, plus 1500 year plus, I would say, no, not really 1500, 2500 year gap between Ismail alayhi salam and now up until the point whereby the Jurhum were almost thrown over, or the Jurhum were overthrown. You're looking at roughly about 500 years when now the Khuza'a came into power. So the Jurhum had really, stayed for a very long time among the Arabs. And it was their chief, Amr ibn Luhay. Amr ibn Luhay, once they overthrew the Khuza'a, he went to Sham, and there he saw something interesting. He saw the worshipping of idols there, but he also noticed the financial boon that was taking place in and around this religious setup. And so he, he probably thought, because the Jews and Christians, in one sense, were also doing that. And so he thought, if he could turn the Kaaba into a center, a kind of a religious center that accommodated all these people, then Makkah would become incredibly wealthy, because Makkah had nothing. It was a barren valley. There was no crop, there was no mineral, there was no metal, there was nothing in Makkah. So he brought Hubal, the idol itself, he brought it back to Mecca, and he basically established that, this idol will bring people closer to Allah as a kind of a central focal point, and it will act as a mediator. Obviously, he didn't just say it out like, I'm just cutting corners, but the actual, realism of it would be different. He probably had priests, and they came in and they gave their priestly sayings or whatnot, and this is how they ended up convincing the people. If you look in Surah Al-Zumar, I think the ayah is in Surah Al-Zumar. He says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ala lillahi deenul khalis. Indeed, to Allah alone is the exclusive deen. And you'll find translations will typically say, the word deen has often been disputed, but you'll find translations that put it as a religion. I don't think religion is a good translation. Religion actually comes from the Roman word, religio. And if you look at modern definitions of religion, I think there's some kind of a corruption that's been taking place here with language. Because if you do, and you can try this out, anyone there, you can just Google the word religion definition and look and see what comes up. You'll find something like the belief or worship of a superhuman. They'll put in the word superhuman there, that has something of a superhuman power, which is therefore then regarded as a god. And then a different definition you will also find that will say something like its religion is a kind of a range of social cultural systems. It's just something that we've socially made up, put together, brought in certain designated behaviors or practices, and filled in some ethics and morals, worldviews that have been embedded, and sort of build this whole thing up and presented it as, okay, this is what we're going to follow. So these definitions of the word religion, modern definitions, are really something that corrupt the mind and reduce. So be careful of translations, like I always say. But if you look in the Qur'an, always remember deen as something that is deeply rooted insofar as human inclination is concerned. It is not specified or reduced solely to Islam alone being deen. There are other modes of deen as well, but deen would be something that is deeply rooted in human fitrah, insofar as following a way through life, insofar as what to establish as truth and what to believe in when that truth has become established. So it is deeply tied into faith, belief, and this realization of truth. It's really deep rooted. It's not shallow insofar as just praying your salah and doing the fiqh stuff. Okay. But if you look, so this is why the ayah there, it says that Allah subhanahu, He's acknowledging there are other deens, but ala lillahi, which is like an exception, to Allah, ad-deenul khalis is the exclusivity, meaning there is a specific mode that is true where others could be partially true or partially or completely false. But there is a specific mode of relation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is 100% true. And that truth or that inclination is exclusive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning there is no intermediary that you require. These are some of the debates that are in Aqidah with regards to things like intercession. Do you need somebody on behalf of you to help you connect to Allah, or can you just relate? These are some of the debates. I'm not going to get into all that because it's not an Aqidah session. I just want to, really paint a picture here, because you need to understand how these Arabs were thinking at that time when the Quran was coming down and the Prophet ﷺ was telling them to abandon these polytheistic ways and unite. What does that mean? You see, what does it mean to unify? What does Tawḥīd mean? Is what he was trying to educate them in that early stage. And so he says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that ayah, وَالَّذِينَ اتَّخَذُوا مِن دُونِهِ أَوْلِيَاءَ مَا نَعْبُدُهُمْ إِلَّا لِيُقَرِّبُونَ إِلَى اللَّهِ زُلْفَى. You see, those who then took others aside from him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their excuse on that was that, well, we're only, doing that so that we can come nearer to Allah. We're only doing this, like we're only worshiping. This is what the Hindu will tell you. The Hindu, the real Hindu, not the one who is brainwashed by the nominalistic aspect of Hinduism, but the one who actually understands his religion, will tell you that the worship of the idol is not a core component of his faith. In that, what he'll tell you is that the worship of the idol is actually for the common people. It's not for the exclusive Brahman. It's just so that because these people of lesser intelligence, they can somehow connect to God himself. It's just a facilitator, something that they can focus on. And so this is what they were saying. Even this is the same argument that the Arabs had. A similar argument has been made by other denominations like the Romans, the Greeks. They all used this. We only follow this because of that. And we, it's just so that we can draw closer to that divine and that spiritual state, etc., etc. These are all excuses that were being presented. But they overall maintained that belief that there is a higher divine. There is a higher supreme God above all this. That is what polytheism is. And this is why you find in their statements, they keep on saying things like, Wallahi, by Allah, this happened. By Allah, they keep on mentioning Rabb al-Kaaba. They keep on saying that because they still maintain belief in God. It's just what you would say is a corrupted belief. Now, coming back to the seerah, I want to focus on something key today, which I think is going to be very useful because it is very much relatable with the world as it is. And this is the portion whereby the Prophet ﷺ is now gaining some traction, very little. He's not gaining that many in terms of followership, but he's disturbed the waters. And the Quraysh are very concerned. Almost every meeting, they have to keep mentioning, how do we deal with this? Though he's not gaining that many followers on a daily basis, there's a lot of confusion that is being created in the belief system of these people. And some of this is also trickling into their own families. So they've seen now what's happening is that when the pilgrims come in every season, because this is what Makkah survives on. This is their key source of income now. When the pilgrims come into the city, they come with their caravans, they come with their wealth, they come with everything, you know. And so this is the time when Makkah is at its economic peak. And what's happening here is the only reason why they come into Makkah is because of these idols and these gods, right? This is how it was established by Amr ibn Luhay. He established it so that people could come in and then spend some time in Mecca with their gods. So here is the concern of the Quraysh, saying, look, he's telling us to abandon all these. If we get rid of all these, then they're not going to come anymore to Mecca. We're going to lose a huge chunk of our business. And when they're saying a huge chunk, they're talking about maybe 80% of their yearly income as merchants. The other 20% was from them going back and forth in their own caravans. But much of it was what they brought into Mecca and sold at a premium during the Hajj, the pilgrimage season. More than that, they are also concerned that they are going to lose their value and their position among the rest of the Arabs. So there's a lot at stake here for them. Worldly and material, yes, but a lot of it is at stake. So, you know, they're still trying to figure out how they're going to deal with all this. And here arises a group now among them that the Qur'an describes as al-Mustahzi'ūn. These are those who are obstinate in their denial, in their defiance, and they're constantly mocking the Prophet, mocking the Muslims, and are just doing it out of spite. Despite recognizing, they're doing it out of spite, despite recognizing that there is truth to what he's saying. They're not doing it out of confusion or for any other reason. They're doing it purely because of ego. Because these individuals, they are going to be the biggest losers, or so they think. You know, when Muhammad, the one who was an orphan, who has no wealth, who has no societal standing or political standing or influence or whatsoever, when they have to then pledge allegiance to him as their leader, see, they're concerned about the image this will create of themselves among the Quraysh, among the Meccan tribes, and among the rest of the Arab people. So among them, there's one individual called, I'm going to talk about all of them, you know, each of them. I want to paint a picture of each of them as much as I can. We spoke about Abu Lahab, he's one of them. Abu Jahl is also one of them. Abu Jahl is sort of their leader, their group leader. But there are other individuals who, you know, I want to also mention and bring into the limelight. So one of them is al-Walid ibn al-Mughira. This is the father of Khalid ibn al-Walid. Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira, he is essentially at that point, he's one of the wealthiest men in Mecca. He's old, he's wise, and he's got good political standing. He's also recognized as someone who has great intelligence among them. And there's one incident where he was near the Kaaba, and the Prophet ﷺ, he used to come and he used to pray at the Kaaba. Just like all these other idolaters used to come in, they would do their tawaf and do their worship and whatnot. Each one had their own designated spot where they had their God. The Prophet ﷺ used to come in and he used to pray at the Yemeni corner, but facing towards Jerusalem. So in a way that he would, like, the Kaaba would be right in front of him, and then he would be facing sort of northwest-ish, thereabouts. So he would be facing in that direction. And so he was there, the Prophet ﷺ was there, and Al-Walid, and because Dar al-Nidwa is just within the perimeter of the courtyard of the Kaaba. So, Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira was just around there. And, these people at some point during the day, they just have nothing to do because their flocks are being tended to. The market, they didn't sit in the market the way we do, most people do today. The shop is open from 7 in the morning till midnight. They usually did their trades and stuff in the morning, and then they would like sleep in the afternoon and just social gatherings and whatnot. That was their lifestyle. So he's got nothing to do, Al-Walid, and just hanging around the Kaaba there. So, he comes up to the Prophet and says, let's hear some of that poetry you keep reciting. And he's doing this in a sort of a provocative manner, you see, because he knows that the Prophet is not a poet. And if you're not a poet and you open your mouth to recite poetry, in that culture, you would make such a fool of yourself. Poetry would be written and codified about you doing that. And that would be like a stain on you and your bloodline for generations to come. So this is what he's trying to do. What they're trying to do is to put the Prophet in a humiliating position where he would make a fool of himself. And then they would go around and tell the Meccans, well, you see, here we go. We tried to tell you guys, but you see. So this is what he's trying to, well, let's hear some of that poetry of yours. And there's all these other people who are all gathered there. So the Prophet ﷺ, he turned to him and said that it's not poetry. But if you want to hear some, I'll recite some of it to you. And so he recites to him from Surah Ghafir, the first 3 ayat of Surah Ghafir. He begins, A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem. He begins, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Hamim. Now, just before I proceed reciting, Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira, by the way, these individuals, these are masters of their own language. And Al-Walid was really a master. He was recognized as someone who had mastered the Arabic language, including poetry. This is why he's also provoking the Prophet here. Now listen to this, and listen to these 3 ayat from Al-Walid's perspective. If you are an Arab and you are hearing this, I know most of you might not be able to know the meaning of it. If you can, open it up on your thing, or your computer, or whatever you're using, and just look at maybe the translation, and then following up the meaning, but really listen to the words, because you need to see this from his perspective. He begins the Prophet, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Hamim. Tanzilul Kitabi min Allahil Azizil Alim. غافر الذنب وقابل التوب شديد العقاب ذي الطول لا إله إلا هو إليه المصير. To an Arab, that is just eloquence of something, of somewhere else. It's not of this world. For an Arab who's hearing this, because there's a kind of alliteration that is taking place here that is so unique. You can't place it in poetry, and you cannot place it in prose either. And you're hearing all these E sounds that are coming into this sort of a cadence in Arabic. You have the Rahmani, you have Bismi, Lahi, Rahmani, Rahim, Hamim. Then you have Tanzilul Kitabi min Allahi al-Azizil Alim. Ghafiri al-Dhanbi wa Qabili al-Tawbi Shadidil Iqabi Dhi Tawli. And so even there you've got a kind of an idafa that's taking place. You've got Ghafiri al-Dhanbi wa Qabili al-Tawbi Shadidil Iqabi. You see that cadence? It's like a triadic cadence, like a triplet. then you have, and then it breaks it. It breaks the cadence to turn the idafa into a different kind of possessive, the tawli. And then he just stops right there and says, La ilaha illa huwa ilayhi al-masir. This is articulation, this is bayan, this is the sweetness of the language, of the Quranic language. I'm not just talking about the Arabic language, but the Quranic language. You know, he's saying this is the revelation. Tanzilul Kitab is a revelation. It's been sent down. Tanzil has been sent down. An ordinance from Allah Most High, right? Most exalted. Aziz, Al-Alim, Most High in exaltation. And who knows all of it has compiled this and he sent it down. He is the forgiver of sin, غافر الذنب, and he is the acceptor of repentance, وقابل التوب. He forgives the sin and he is the one who accepts repentance. شديد العقاب, and he is the one who deals severity in punishment. ذي الطول, he is the possessor or the owner, the master of abundance. And by the way, this is Al-Walid al-Mughira, who has abundance. So he's hearing this and he knows what it's referring to. You know, La ilaha illa huwa. There is no other except him. Ilayhi al-Masir. To him is the final destination. From Al-Walid's perspective, it just startles him. It throws him off, really. And when he heard this, he said, then the Prophet, went away. And whoever was with him, he just turned to him and said, Wallahi laqad sami'tu minhu kalaman ma huwa min kalam al-ins wala min kalam al-jinn. So by Allah, I have heard a speech from him that cannot possibly be of the speech of mankind or of the speech of jinn kind. And he said on that, وَإِنَّ لَهُ لَحَلَاوَةً. It's got a sweetness to it. وَإِنَّ عَلَيْهِ لَطَلَاوَةٌ. It has a kind of a splendor to it. He couldn't even pinpoint that. It just moved him. وَإِنَّ أَعْلَاهُ لَمُثْمِرٌ. Its highest point. This is him describing it. Now, so see how articulate he himself is when he's describing it. He said, وَإِنَّهُ أَعْلَاهُ لَمُثْمِرٌ. Its highest point is like it's just bearing fruit. وَإِنَّ أَسْفَلَهُ لَمَغْدَقٌ. And its lowest point is just flowing like rivers. He's talking about because in speech you've got these ups and downs, the kind of a rhythm that comes up and down. وَإِنَّهُ لَيَعْلَمُ وَلَا يُعْلَى عَلَيْهِ. Him, the Prophet Muhammad, he's very sound of mind. He can't see anything wrong with that just by reciting those words. He's saying there is nothing above him, like a jinn or a demon that's, sort of manipulating his thoughts or corrupting them. That speech is so pure that he himself cannot find any fault with the speech itself, the words themselves, or the one who is speaking them. This statement of his somehow made it to the Quraysh. And when they heard it, they became distressed because Al-Walid was, he's one of the strong guys. And they're now concerned that Al-Walid is going to fall into Muhammad's group. Now, then we're going to be crippled. So Abu Jahl, he stands up and says, I'll take care of it. Like he's going to solve this. This is a problem for them. I'm going to solve the problem. So he goes to meet with Al-Walid, and he goes in and he puts on like a sad sort of demeanor, an attitude, a sullen face. And he sits down there with him, and Al-Walid like asks him, what is wrong with you? And Abu Jahl, this is why they called him Abul Hakam. He is very clever. He's put on this whole act, and he's sitting with Al-Walid there, and he tells Al-Walid, it's like terrible news. Everyone in Dar al-Nidwa is decided that they are going to collect money for you. And so Al-Walid is, for me, why? I don't need their money. And he tells him, to help you out in your old age, kind of like a retirement fund. And he tells him that we heard that you have been frequenting the house of Muhammad and the house of the son of Abu Kabsha, who is Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr's father was called Abu Kabsha. This is what we heard. We heard that you've been going to their houses so that they can feed you. So we figured you're in very dire needs now. And this statement, this is how Shaitan talks, by the way. It really pricked his ego, Al-Walid. It made him angry. Because he's proud of who he is, Al-Walid, of his wealth and his status in Mecca. So he immediately denounced what he had heard from the Prophet. Because initially when he heard that, he acknowledged it as a true recitation. And when now his ego was called to question, he just rejected it completely. Now that is a kind of kufr whereby you've heard the truth, you've understood the truth, and then you still deny it. That has got consequences. It's different from a kind of kufr which comes from ignorance, whereby you didn't understand the truth, right? That's a little different, it's still kufr, but this has got greater consequences. And the Qur'an will respond to this statement of his. Because what happens now as they are gathering together in Dar al-Nadwa, at one point, now it's been maybe about a year or so since the Prophet ﷺ, he made his open declaration, probably 2 years. And so they're all gathered there, and Al-Walid now addresses the Quraysh among their weekly meetings or whatever, and he tells them, you haven't thought about something. He tells them, Ya ma'ashara Quraysh, innahu qad hadara hadha al-mawsam. You haven't thought about what's going on. The season is upon you. The season of Hajj is coming. Wa innahu wufud al-Arabi sataqdamu alaykum fihi. And the Arabs, when they come, they're going to come to you, and they're going to ask you, وَقَدْ سَمِعُوا بِأَمْرِ صَاحِبِكُمْ هَذَا. They're going to ask you about this companion of yours, the one who is spreading his message. He's referring to the prophets. So he tells them, فَأَجْمِعُوا فِيهِ رَأْيًا وَاحِدًا. You better get together on a common, get your story straight. وَلَا تَخْتَلِفُوا فَيُكَذِّبَ بَعْضُكُمْ بَعْضًا. Don't disagree, don't conflict each other. وَيَرُدَّ قَوْلُكُمْ بَعْضُهُ بَعْضًا. That you end up contradicting each other, because you're going to make fools of yourself. I'm translating it poorly, but if you understand the Arabic, you can tell that he is a really articulate individual. And you know what? Just to give him justice, I'll reiterate his statement as full. He said, يا معشر قريش إنه قد حضر هذا الموسم وإن فوود العرب ستقدم عليكم فيه وقد سمعوا بأمر صاحبكم هذا فأجمعوا فيه رأيا واحدا وَلَا تَخْتَلِفُوا فَيُكَذِّبَ بَعْضُكُمْ بَعْضًا وَيَرُدَّ قَوْلُكُمْ بَعْضُهُ بَعْضًا. What he's telling them in a nutshell is that, look, the season of Hajj is coming. You've been bickering amongst yourselves about all the other issues that are going on, but now the Arabs are going to come, and we've seen what they've been doing, the Muslims. Whenever the pilgrims are coming in, they go and talk to them. And these Arabs, they're going to come and question you, what is going on here? Because you guys are the trustees, you're the guardians of the house. We have been giving you our money, our coin. We've been coming and trading here, thinking that you are going to safeguard our beliefs. So what is going on here? They're going to question you. And they're going to ask you, what is this we're hearing about, Muhammad and his people? So he told them, listen, you better get your story straight so you don't have conflicting views or contradictory positions, because you're going to get caught up in a lie. See, they knew what the Prophet was saying was true, but they still had their own interests to protect. And so they themselves didn't know what to do here. So they asked him, they say to him, فَأَنْتَ يَا أَبَا عَبْدِ الشَّمْسِ, you tell us, father of Abd Shams, his son, who is still Al-Walid, one of his sons was called Abd Shams. You tell us, فَقُلْ وَأَقِمْ لَنَا رَأْيًا نَقُولُ بِهِ. You tell us what your view is, and what we should say about him. He counters them and says, بَلْ أَنْتُمْ فَقُولُوا وَأَسْمَعُوا. Rather, you guys tell me what you're thinking, and I will listen, and then I will give you my view. So they say, okay, نَقُولُ كَاهِنٌ. We will say that he is a kahin, he is a soothsayer. Now, soothsayer actually in the Old English means truth-sayer. Sooth is sort of the Old English variation of the modern word truth. So a soothsayer was thought to be a truth-sayer, as in somebody who could see into the unseen or tell you something about yourself that you have hidden, and then they can speak the truth of it. And so a soothsayer was typically more closely related to a prophet, because a prophet would speak truths that the common people, the rest of the people did not have access to, right? So this is the first option that they went to, the closest in relation. They said, we'll say he's a soothsayer, it's simple. And then he thinks about it. He thinks about it and he says, La wallah, that will not work. Ma huwa bikahin. He's not a soothsayer. لَقَدْ رَأَيْنَا الْكُهَّانِ. We have seen the soothsayers. فَمَا هُوَ بِزَمْزَمَةِ الْكَاهِنِ وَلَا سَجْعِهِ. He doesn't have the zamzama, the rumblings, the mumblings. They talk in the, like they'll be muttering to themselves, and then they'll throw their bones or something like that and mutter to themselves, right? He doesn't have that. And by the way, just on a side note here, the word zamzama is called ism al-sawt. It's like a noun that is named after the sound that it makes. And some of the opinions hold that it's one of the names from which the well of Zamzam is named after that, because of the mumbling sound that the water makes, when the water would make when it came out of the well. In some literary works, you will find the phrase, the murmur of water. The murmuring of water is used to describe like a stream that's flowing, bubbling stream. It's got a soft sort of that kind of a murmuring. That's Zamzama. So he's telling them, Al-Walid, فَمَا هُوَ بِزَمْزَمَةِ الْكَاهِنِ. He doesn't have the mumbling of a kahin, of a soothsayer. وَلَا سَجْعِهِ. And he doesn't have saj'a. Now, saj'a is very interesting. I'm going to take a little bit of time here to just explain what is saja. Saja is an early type of composition in speech that is prose, but is not poetry. So human language has got only two identifying marks. All of human language, doesn't matter which tongue it is, which language group it is, all of human expression in terms of language comes out in two forms. One is poetry and the other is prose. And for poetry, the unit of measure is verse. So verse is the unit of measure in poetry, and sentence is the unit of measure in in prose. And saja is a type of sentence that sounds like a verse, but it's not a verse because it has no poetic meter. But it is it's used because of its strength in articulation. It has a kind of a rhythm and it ends with harmonious sounds. It doesn't follow poetic meter, but it has a musicality and a flow. It will employ, sometimes it will employ something called parallelism or triadic cadence, like stacking, you know, stacked crescendos. I'll give you some examples. It uses like stacked crescendos that basically build up ideas and really get like a movement. It's meant to appeal emotionally. Now, soothsayers were very well known for using this type of articulation. But it's also been used in elegant literary writing. So it's not just, they didn't invent it. Soothsayers did not invent it. It's a way human beings speak. It's a rhetorical device. The Qur'an also uses it, saja, but it uses it in a way that does not bind it to that technique, meaning it's not its defining quality. The Qur'an uses all known literary devices, all, in poetry and in prose, and all rhetorical devices, all logical devices. The Quran uses all of those, but it cannot be classified as verse or as sentence. The Quran is not bound to any of those. It's its own language category. It doesn't follow any of the human way of articulation. So if I had to give you an example of saja in English, I might say something like, he spoke with grace at a gentle pace, in search for truth in age and youth. So that's if you see the rhyming that's taking place, you've got the grace and then the pace, then you've got the truth and then the youth. It sounds like poetry, but it's not poetry. It's a single sentence. It has got no poetic meter, but it sounds, it's got a musical sort of build up to it. A kahin, a soothsayer, will typically use the same device and might say something like, you know, I warn you of storms incoming, nights that hum and fates that run, no man can escape, not pauper, not king. So you see like that coming and then ending with the word king. Then in between I've put in, you know, nights that hum and fates that run. That's a kind of, that cadence, that it's not poetry, but it's got this flow to it. Modern advertisements and political campaigns will use saja a lot. You know, you'll hear something like, have a break, have a Kit Kat, right? Eat clean, train mean, live lean. So have a break, have a Kit Kat. You've got the have a in there. Have a break, have a Kit Kat. That's sort of a, you know, cadence. Or you'll hear something like, make America great again. That's saja, make America great. It's short. It's not a long sentence, but it's short. It's a slogan, but you've got the k in there. Make America great again. You see the k in there. Or you'll hear people, you know, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That is saja. You see, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That also has a kind of a measure to it. let me see. You'll hear something like, "Our people united shall never be defeated," or "Have a spine, stand in line, um, free Palestine." Have a spine, stand in line, free Palestine. Or what do we want? Ceasefire. When do we want it? Now. That the want there in there, and the way the cadence is built. Or you'll hear another one, "From Ukraine to Palestine, occupation is a crime." It's not poetry. There's no meter in it, but there is a way that you can measure it in terms of sentence, of prose. They have a kind of an A B, and then a BC. The AB is it's sort of a measurement. It's just a measure to. It's not a metric in and of itself. So it's like, "Our people," or "Have a spine, stand in line." That's AB. Free Palestine. That's your BC. You see? So the repetition in there, or the repetition of certain words, or the rhyming of certain words, that gives it a kind of a melodic flow, that is called saja. Okay? You'll hear modern Muslim scholars use it a lot. And I don't think they know that they're using it. It's sort of become like a trait. Almost all of them, they speak the same way. Many of them, they're more like motivational speakers. They'll usually put on this kind of a rhythm. You'll hear something like, "Look at the positive, look at the good, look at all the blessings, and be thankful." So that look at, you see? Or you'll hear something like, "Iman is not just on the tongue, it's not just on the heart, it's not just in the mind, it has to be in the action." You see? That it's kind of a rhythm, a sort of a scaffolding, not a scaffolding, more like it's a stacking crescendo that builds up to an idea that you want to really get it out there and move people emotionally. You see? Something like, "Develop your link with Allah, your connection with Allah, your friendship with Allah, praise Allah, remember Allah as you stand, as you sit, as you sleep. Read your du'as, read your supplications, read your adhkar." You see, that's that building, that stacking, that's a triadic stacking. Many of them will speak like this. Many of the modern, you can try this out and take a look. I don't think they realize that they're doing this, because many of them don't actually study proper rhetoric and oration. But anyway, that's what saja is. Now, this is what he's identifying. Al-Walid is identifying here about the Prophet's speech. And by the way, the Prophet's speech is not his own speech only. It's also revelation about the Qur'an. And he's looking at it, and they're saying, well, let's just call him a soothsayer. And then he's telling them, I don't think so. Because if we observe what he's saying, first of all, when he speaks, he's very clear and articulate. You won't see him mumbling to himself or trying to figure it out before he speaks. You won't see him doing that. At the same time, when you hear what he's saying, he's not doing this beating of emotional appeal. He's just reciting the ayah as it's coming. It's like just flowing through him. Unlike when you see many of these motivational Muslim scholars, celebrities that come in, Mufti this one, Doctor the other one, Sheikh so-and-so, Ustad the other one, etc., etc. When they're speaking, it's like they really are struggling to put their point across, or they don't actually have a solid argument, or they don't actually understand in full the subject or the topic that they're discussing. So in order to keep the audience hooked on, which is really the idea here, is to keep the audience hooked on, they'll use this way of speech just to appeal to their emotional aspect. And it will move the listeners, the audience emotionally. They will love Sheikh so-and-so, how he speaks. I like how he talks. That's what you'll hear mostly. But in terms of actual knowledge being delivered, and actual understanding, that's really not given. They fail in that regard. So that's what Al-Walid is saying. I don't see that, because this is how soothsayers talk. They tell you things that you want to hear. They keep you hooked in because they want your money. You see, they're not here to impart wisdom to you. The soothsayer is in the business of soothsaying. So he'll tell you things you want to hear in order to bring you back as a customer. So they say, okay, well, that makes sense. فَنَقُولُ مَجْنُونَ. Well, let's just say that he's possessed then. Now, possessed here, majnoon, actually carries two words, two meanings. One is possessed by a demon, like jinn possession. The other is to do with psychology, which is the kind of possession that is to do with the lower self overwhelming the rational self. And then as a result, the individual becomes majnoon, insane. He loses his sanity. He's either overwhelmed by his emotions, or he's overwhelmed by his desires. So he thinks about it, Al-Walid, and says, Ma huwa bi majnoon. He's not insane. He's not possessed. And he argues back and says, لَقَدْ رَأَيْنَا الْمَجْنُونَ وَعَرَفْنَاهُ. We know the possessed. We've seen them. And we understand what possession actually is, in terms of the jinn possessing and in terms of the self also possessing or coming over. And this is really interesting. When I read this, I was really astounded by what he says here, because he's described psychological disorder in a nutshell in this statement of his. He says, فَمَا هُوَ بِخَنْقِهِ وَلَا تَخَالُجِهِ وَلَا وَسْوَسَتِهِ. And he notes three entities in there. First of all, he's saying that he is not strangulating. And then he says, he is not trembling. And the third one, he's saying, he's not whispering. And these three are to do with, number one, khanq is a kind of a suffocation or a choking that describes, the feeling of tightness that happens in the chest or in the throat. And this is linked to an episode of extreme stress or anxiety or panic. It's a kind of psychosomatic reaction to something that is stressful, where the patient in this case really feels physically like something is choking them, like I can't breathe. And one of the things that they will do in therapy is try to open this up, to loosen this up, just to give that feeling, to loosen up the feeling of, or to open up the airways. All right. They will typically express like shortness of breath, palpitations, tension. It would result in something. It would result in panic attacks and can even result in severe anxiety, whereby that anxiety becomes like a physical manifestation that then dominates perception. And so this is what he's saying. If I observe him, I don't see that happening with him. The second one he mentions is takhaluj. And this is actually in reference to convulsion or epilepsy, which is one of the symptoms of a psychological breakdown. It would refer to in the early stages, it might not be fully developed as epilepsy or epileptic, but in the early stages, it can generate movements or convulsions that look like epileptic tremors. Some of the classical scholars, they interpreted it as a condition where the mind is agitated due to mental disturbances. Like a sudden twitch, as though something is watching you, or some, like you feel something and like a sudden twitch like that. That's what he's referring to here. He's saying, I don't see that in him. The third, which is really astounding to me, is the waswasa. Now, waswasa, if you look from the spiritual perspective, where usually you will see the waswasa as translated as demonic whispering or shaitan's whispering. But waswasa is actually a technical term in psychology. And Abu Zayd al-Balkhi uses it as such to describe what we would call in modern psychology as obsessive compulsive disorder. There's a kind of a whispering that becomes obsessive in and of itself, whereby your own thoughts then become intrusive and they become persistent, which in and of itself is attributed to a demonic quality, which is why it is called waswasa and it's linked to shaitan, because waswasa is a demonic quality. It is not an angelic or even a human quality per se. So it's not necessarily insanity. It's more of a mental harassment from repetitive thoughts that are seeking dominance, right? This is what obsessive compulsive disorder is in modern psychology, the obsessive and compulsive thoughts. So he's highlighting these three, which is really astounding, that because, you know, the fact that it is recognized that early on is just is truly amazing. So this is what he tells him, that look, I don't see these symptoms in him. So to call him insane is in and of itself is insane. It's not true. And, you know, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot by saying that. So they counter say, well, okay, then فَنَقُولُ شَاعِرٌ, we'll say he's a poet. Because he's coming up with all these rhymes and, you know, these statements that really sound like rhymes. Now, a lot of them, when they're saying this, some of them are not poets themselves. But those who are poets, they would easily identify and say, this is not poetry. And Al-Walid is one of those. He's an accomplished poet. So he says, ما هو بشاعر. He's not a poet. لقد عرفنا الشعر. We know poetry. This is the mark of our language. كلها. We know poetry in its entirety. كله rather, because of the, yeah. So it's كله. We know poetry, we know its entirety. زجره, رجزه, because rajaz is basically rhyme. We know its rhyme. وهزجه. Hazaj is meter. So we know its rhyme, we know its meter. وقريضه, we know its verse. ومقبوضه, we know its contraction, appeal. And then ومبسوطه, we know its expansive appeal, because poetry does that. It's designed in such a way, sometimes it will instill a kind of a contraction in the listener. And then sometimes it will instill a kind of an expansion in the listener. So some poetry will make you sad. And then some poetry will make you really happy. You see? So we know how it works. We know how to do all these things in poetry. فَمَا هُوَ بِالشِّعْرِ. What he's saying is not poetry. It just doesn't fit any of these things. So you say, well, فَنَقُولُ سَاحِرٌ. What else is there? We'll say he's a sorcerer. He thinks about it. ما هو بساحر. He's not a sorcerer. لقد رأينا السحار وسحرهم. We know the sorcerers. We know how they do their magic. فما هو بنفثهم ولا عقدهم. He has no. So nafatha and aqada, these are the two sort of identify as the two main ways in which sorcery is done. So nafatha is the blowing, and then aqada is the tying. So you know, Surah Al-Falaq. قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفاثات في العقد. Right? The nafatha is the blowing. في العقد, in the knots. Now, nafatha and aqada are the are the twisted and corrupted versions of poetry and prose. So poetry and prose, which is part of natural human expression, nafatha and aqada is the twisted version of those two. So nafatha is actually incantation, the blowing of an incantation, and aqada is what you would call spell binding, or the binding of spells. Nafatha is the incantation, is a twisted form of poetry, and spell work is a twisted form. So really, sorcery is in a way, a twisted and corrupted form of human expression. It's meant to do corruption. It's meant to cause a disruption, a harm by the use of language, because it's language that affects the internal state. Good language will induce a good state, and bad language, corrupted language, vile language, vulgar language, all of these will induce a bad state. And then you've got the really wicked and vile language, which will put you in a completely, destroyed state. So he tells them, no, look, he's not doing any of these. We know what sorcery is. We can listen to what he's saying. There's nothing corruptive about what he's saying, because they didn't do this. Sorcerers typically used to do this, to write. That was the spell binding. They used to bind the spell. So they used to write that aqada. They would write that the corrupted forms of language in different forms. Then they would bind it, and then they would blow on it with incantations, like poetry that was designed to invoke demons to come in, and then to sort of put them together, to bind the spell to that demon to carry out the task, etc., etc. So he's telling them that this is not, I don't see him doing that. So we can't call him a sahir. So they say, well, now what else is there? فَمَا نَقُولُ Ya Aba Abd Shams. What else? What do we say now? So he thinks about it, and there's a reason why I'm going through this in real detail. But we're almost done, inshallah. Give me a few more minutes. He says, Wallahi, he's really thinking about it. Inna liqawlihi lahalawatan. He's repeating what he said before, when he heard the recitation from Surah Ghafir. Inna liqawlihi lahalawatan. His speech is sweet. What he's saying has sweetness. Wa inna aslahu la'adqun. The origin of that speech is like a cluster of dates. Wa inna far'ahu lajunatun. Its branches are fruitful. This is a remarkable thing for him to say, because one of the identifying markers of the Qur'an is that it's not just in its initial articulation has a sweetness. When you trace the meanings, the source itself has a kind of spiritual resonance within you. In addition to that, when you look at every ayah, it has branches. It now connects you to other aspects. It gives you concepts. It gives you a sort of a map that you can actually now bridge into other directions. This is what he's saying, that its branches, when he's reciting an ayah, its branches are fruitful, meaning they take you to something else of realization, something else that gives you another kind of sweetness. And then that takes you somewhere else, and then that takes you somewhere else, and it just expands you. So he's saying we can't call this sihr. It's not possible. This is what he tells them is, وَمَا أَنْتُمْ بِقَائِلِينَ وَمَا أَنْتُمْ بِقَائِلِينَ مِنْ هَذَا شَيْئًا إِلَّا عُرِفَ أَنَّهُ بَاطِلٌ. There is nothing you can say about this that would be truthful. It would immediately be known to be false. Anyone who hears this, if they really give it even a moment's thought, they will immediately know that what you're telling them is false. So you have to be careful here, is what he's telling them, that look, you don't want to get caught up in a lie. But what we can do is we can position ourselves in a kind of factual gray area whereby there's some kind of ambiguity. And what he's proposing to them now is what the modern world does to people. This is why I'm spending so much time on this. What he's going to propose to them is what's being done today in terms of Hollywood, in terms of YouTube and Instagram and social media and did I say Hollywood? Yeah, and music, or celebrity, in terms of sports events and World Cups and Champions Leagues and all this stuff. This is what he's proposing to them. He's telling them, وَإِنَّ أَقْرَبَ الْقَوْلِ فِيهِ لَأَن تَقُولُوا سَاحِرٌ. From all these options that you've presented to me, I think that the closest that you can use to describe him is that he is a sahir. That's the closest. Because sahir will normally do his magic, in hiding. Okay? But there is something similar here between what he's actually doing and what the sahir actually does. He's saying here, جاء بقول هو سحر يفرق به بين المرء وأبيه وبين المرء وأخيه وبين المرء وزوجته وبين المرء وعشيرته. Because what you can say then is that he has come with certain words that in and of themselves are, factually speaking, causing a separation between, a man and his father, a man and his brother, a man and his wife, a man and his kinship. That's what is factually happening. We can see this happening in front of us. So you're not going to be caught in a lie. As for everything else, it's a matter of just proving it. This is that kind of forward progressive kind of thought that the intellect is culprit of, because the Qur'an responds to him. In Surah Muddathir, I think it starts from ayah number 10. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ذَرْنِي وَمَنْ خَلَقْتُ وَحِيدًا. Leave me to deal with the one whom I created I created in solitude, alone. He had nothing. I created him, he had nothing. No wealth, no children, no status, not even a name. He had nothing. I created him. Let me deal with him. It's referring to him, Al-Walid, Al-Mughira. وَجَعَلْتُ لَهُ مَالًا مَمْدُودًا. I am the one who bestowed upon him the extensive wealth that he is boasting. وَبَنِينَ شُهُودًا. And the children whom he is proud of. And definitely, these were children to be proud of. You've got Khalid ibn al-Walid. These were children to be proud of. وَمَهَدْتُ لَهُ تَمْهِيدًا. And I spread out everything for him in his life. I'm the one who gave him the ease. ثُمَّ يَطْمَعُ أَنْ أَزِيدَ. Then on top of that, he desires that I should add more for him. Regardless of when I sent guidance to him, he heard it and he understood and he accepted it as true, and then he turns around and he mocks it. This is one thing that the Qur'an does not tolerate. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not tolerate mocking. Whether it's them mocking Muslims, mocking the Qur'an, or it's even we who are mocking them. Even it goes both ways. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not like mocking, does not like this kind of a joking, to make fun of other peoples and their religions and their ways, even their gods, however many they might be. Kalla, it's not going to happen. No. Innahu kana li'ayatina anida. He has been obstinate towards our ayat. When we sent down to him, he heard it, and he now becomes obstinate towards it. Sa'urhiquhu sa'uda. I will cover him with a terrible, terrible torment, a terrible punishment. Why? Because after that, innahu fakkara wa qaddara. He's sitting there and he's thinking and he's deliberating, how should I bring this man down? He's the one who proposed the idea. Remember, they were seated, all of them. He's the one who brought up the idea that we need to do something here. And then now they're doing all this discussion and he's deliberating, he's thinking it. فَقُتِلَ كَيْفَ قَدَّرَ. See how he's destroying himself. By the way, he's deliberating, this forward progressive thinking that he's doing. ثُمَّ قُتِلَ كَيْفَ. Let him just be destroyed for his deliberations. He wants to do it deliberately. But he was seated there. ثُمَّ نَظَرَ. He was considering it. ثُمَّ عَبَسَ وَبَصَرَ. Every idea they were giving him, he was frowning. He was scowling. That will not work. ثُمَّ أَدْبَرَ وَاسْتَكْبَرَ. Then he thought about it and he saw it, and each point that he is giving his argument, he's saying, no, he's not a sahir. He's not a kahin. He's not. Look at what he's saying. He is actually acknowledging the truth of what the Prophet is bringing. But adbara wastakbara, similar to what Iblis was doing, he turned his back and he was arrogant about it. And then he says, in the conclusion of it all, فَقَالَ إِنَّ هَذَا إِلَّا سِحْرٌ يُؤْثَرٌ. Well, you know what? Let's just say that this is a sihr. What he's saying is a sihr that is affecting everything. It's affecting, if you come into contact with it, if you hear these words, they will affect you. Because see what it's doing. It's separating man from his wife. It's causing separation. Father and son are arguing and breaking the family apart. Brother is turning on brother because of what. You see what he's doing? This is sihr. You see? So you have to be careful. In hadha illa qawlul bashar. By the way, it is not divine. There's nothing that he's saying is divine. It is just from his own speech. He's making it up. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to that, Sa'uslihi saqar. I am going to drive him into the saqar, the fire. These verses, these ayat, they were all revealed because of him, because of what he said, Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira. And it doesn't stop there. You see, it's going to continue. He's going to do more even on that. You see, but he's given his advice to the Quraysh. And so the Quraysh now said, okay, let's do it. So they set out because, I mean, they've admitted now in this case that Muhammad is not a sorcerer. But his speech is as a consequence. They're looking at the yu'thar. You see, they're looking at the athar of it, not the source of it. They're saying, let's divert now. Let's draw out their focus. Let's draw it away from the source and let's turn their attention towards the effects. Let's bring them to cause and effect so that here we can work with technicalities. We can manipulate facts in this political subjective domain. You see, so it doesn't become a fault on us either. And so this is what they did. They sent out all their youth, the young people, the Quraysh and the young people. They sent them out, go all around the city, mostly towards the entryways into Makkah. And so they lingered around the roads, and they started intercepting the people before they came into Makkah to warn them about Muhammad. Be careful. You know, he's saying like this and like this. This is witchcraft. If it touches your ears, you're going to be in big trouble. Be careful. You don't get affected by these words. This, in modern psychology, is called the inoculation theory. And it's a theory that posits that a weak counter argument can generate resistance slowly, you see, within the listener, so that by the time he reaches the strong argument itself, he's already developed a kind of an immunity against it. So in terms of vaccination or inoculation, right, in the traditional sense, they would give you a small, very small dosage of the actual illness that's been slightly manipulated, so as not to have many harmful effects on you, but just enough to trigger your immune system so that you develop an immunity against the actual illness itself when you encounter it. That's why it's called the inoculation theory. But this is in terms of ideology. And this is what they're doing here, is that they're sending these people out. It's a weak argument. They know it. They know it's a weak argument. But what they're doing is they're meeting those people head on before they come into Makkah and tell them that, listen, be careful. They're priming their minds already. For a people who are in and of themselves, by their very nature and culture, are already superstitious people. And they are very much aware of witchcraft. And they are very much afraid of it. And so they're already coming in and they're cautious. Every time they see the Prophet or anybody, any of his followers, they just turn around and walk the other way. You know, they just turn and walk the other way. And this is what we call the inoculation theory. Do some research on that. It's very interesting. It's a modern concept. And I mean, if you observe its effects in our culture today, you will see it. You will definitely see it, because these are the techniques that they started implementing. I think we've gone way overboard on time. So maybe I'll stop here and continue next week. There's actually a lot more I wanted to say on this particular concept. A couple of other things that they tried. And I also wanted to show you some examples among individuals whereby their attempts, the Quraysh's attempts to use this technique, this propaganda machine, actually failed. So, you know what, we'll stop here and we'll carry on next week, inshallah, from this point. I'll be able to expand a little bit more and go into some more detail on that. So let's take a quick break. I'm going to go and pray Maghrib and see everyone in a short while, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Inshallah, let's get started. Adil?
Yes, Ustad. Brother Hassan has a question.
Assalamualaikum.
Wa
Can you hear
alaikum
me,
salam.
Sheikh?
Yes, I can hear you. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Thank you very much for today's topic, because I've been battling with this for something that I'm busy writing on. So in terms of modern ambiguity inoculation theory, we're looking at that in terms of neoliberalism and neo-paganism. These are two things that now as a tool of power in order to blur the moral lines and sort of weaken our resistance. I'm talking in terms of Islam. Sort of blurring truth, as we can see, is what they're offering, right? It's an ethical fog and emotional overload, language inflation, all the things that you mentioned about Hollywood, and brings about what we say moral paralysis, political numbness, spiritual drift, and maybe intellectual dependency. Now, these are the things that youth are suffering with. So, where do we start now? They are so smart. I'd like, as if Shaitan is repeating the same tools that he did with the Quraysh, it's happening today. Now, what is our approach? We don't have Khalid bin Walid's father here, Rahimullah, to able to help us to understand those concepts. But what is this now? How do we address this? I mean, the scholars are not talking about these things. And I'm like somebody who's talking maybe some out of the clouds.
You know, inshallah, there was actually a lot more I wanted to say on this. Because as far as like today's session goes, you know, his father, Al-Walid, he just introduced it, right? But there's the actual implementation of it. in terms of the way they actually implemented this strategy that he proposed to them. And that's where I think the more the expansiveness of it is going to take place, because there are certain techniques that are applied that are essentially the same techniques as that are being applied today. And what it is in a nutshell is building, it's not weakening the resistance. It's actually building resistance against the truth. That's what this technique is used for. It's not meant to convert you. It's meant to make you look at the truth and double guess or question it. So, you see something in reality, but then you're just confused about it. And this is really part of the age of the Dajjal. It's the age of confusion. His task is not to, I think I wrote about this in my book, The One-Eyed Imposter. His task is not to convince you of the lie. His task is to cause enough doubt in your mind for you to question the truth. And once he does that, he's succeeded in his mission. That's really what this is all about. It's to make you, it's to confound you about reality. Inshallah, we'll come to next week's session, and I'll go deeper into it, into the comparatives also to how this technique is being used in modern times. Because it's the same concept, it's just that the mediums now have increased. And so it seems like something new, but it's not really something new. It's the same old technique. It's just that it's a lot more complicated and it's become more sophisticated. The devil's tools have become a lot more sophisticated, is what we would say. Yeah. So inshallah, we'll expand on this more next week.
Can I just add there? Because what I've really understood from this is that we need the slogans, right? He's trying to explain to us, which we buy in, that the market becomes the God, right? That the desire becomes doctrine and the morality becomes optional. So that's the modern ambition, right? So he's not, like you said, he's not denying anything. He's just elevating us. So by questioning, because our truth is not structured. I mean, the fundamentals is weak. So again, the Tawḥīdic importance is like you started beginning religion. Ours is not a religion, it's a worldview. So if our worldview is not strong, then we fall into a prey of all these things. Thank you so much. I think it may just sound like you give a story something, but there's so much deep insight. And I'm happy we went for it. So I'm going to stop this. Jazakallah. I'll wait for next week. Inshallah.
Inshallah. We'll talk about more about this next week, inshallah. There are things like moral relativism that will come into play. There are things like, compromised principles, the lack of, like you mentioned, a worldview. At that time, they were targeting people who were not Muslims. They were targeting those who were not Muslims. Today, it's basically the same technique in that the target is towards a new kind of religion by causing people to doubt the current religion. So it's something similar in that sense, but a lot more pronounced. Inshallah, we'll look at it next week in more detail. Now.
Okay, Sister Hina.
Assalamu alaikum, Ustad.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Ustad, I have two questions, totally different. The first one is regarding, first of all, this today's lecture was actually really different, and it was very insightful because this part of Sira, I never thought it of in this way, that the kind of arguments they were using or the techniques they were using to try to prove the message of Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam false, these are even being used today. I mean, it's quite amazing. So my question is this: you were talking about the blowing of the shaitan. So I was also reading your book and I came upon this blowing the nafakha, and I was reminded of this dua that we do. We seek refuge from the hums, the nafkha, and the nafs of shaitan. So can you please elaborate that? A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim wa min hamzihi wa nafthihi wa nafsi. So what are these three things?
So they stem from the same root of noon and fa. So the genus of the term and the concept it represents is the noon character, which is a resonating entity. So the noon itself is a resonating letter. And then the fa there is to do with a resonating entity that has got a breath, and breath is measured, right? So there's an ebb and flow, a breathe in and out, a sort of expansion, contraction, a breathing entity. So what it's referring to in this category of the concept of nafa is an entity that is alive, okay? And then the last letter of all these different terms differs in terms of the quality that is being described. So the nafasa, nafatha, nafakha, nafaha, all these have got a different kind of designation. So nafaha is like a soft breath. Nafakha is like a kind of a breath, like a really strong breath. Nafatha is like a spitting breath that has got some sort of this is nafatha tha. The tha there is usually associated with sorcery, because they sort of they blow on the knots of their sword. This is the part of their practice, is they will blow on the tying of the knot, the incantation along with the breath. So they're also, I don't want to get too much into the details of how the practice is done. It's really not the subject matter. Let me find the right words so that I can condense it in a short form. The idea of sorcery, as the way it is depicted in much of Western culture, right? Things like Harry Potter and all these things is, well, you have a stick and you wave it and you say a word and then something happens. That's not really how sorcery is done. It comes close to defining, but it's not really how it's performed. The actual act of sorcery requires the one who is performing it to pour part of his own life force or essence per se, which is to do with your breath, because your breath is your life. That's the ruh, is the spirit or the breath of life that you have been granted. And the idea of sorcery is for you to sacrifice part of that as a mode of personal payment to whatever pact you're going to have with the demon who is going to help you on the other side of the veil. Because the jinn are in that domain or that dimension that is one step behind the fleshy domain that we occupy. We are in the last domain. They're one step behind that in terms of dimensionality. So our souls are in that previous dimension, and then we inhabit bodies in this next dimension here, the fleshy dimension. So in order to affect the soul of somebody else upon whom the sorcery will be done, a pact is made with the entity that can access that dimension. And that pact has to be, there's some sort of an ethereal bond that is to be created between the two. And so the nafatha there is not just calling upon the demon, oh, so and so, do like this and like this for me. No, there's also it's a ritualistic thing where your own life force is bound to it. So nafatha includes a kind of a spitting sound. The tha there has got a thaqil to it. A spitting of your own life is bound to that. So you're bound to this. This is why when it comes to breaking sorcery or sorcery that is done, there are three ways to do it. One is to break the bond of the jinn itself, the shaitan. So jinn, by the way, will include shaitan. Shaitan is the evil among the jinn. There are other kinds of jinn as well. To break that bond of the shaitan by chasing it away. And that happens via the recitation of the Qur'an. The second way is the actual material bond itself. So if you can find the object upon which the sorcery is bound, you break that, you destroy it, you burn it, it breaks the witchcraft. The third way is to kill the sorcerer who has performed it. So it breaks the bond as well, and it breaks all other contracts that are made by that sorcerer. This is why the punishment for a sorcerer is beheading in Islam. There's no question about it. Although some scholars do argue that they have to be given the opportunity to repent first, but others don't hold that opinion. So that's the nafatha of the, and what that includes is the incantation has got a kind of poetic meter to it, because poetry, by the way, affects the soul directly. Many of us don't realize this, but in terms of modern poetry, modern iteration of poetry would be music. Things like rap and hip hop and all these different genres of music, that's a kind of poetry. It's convoluted. You wouldn't classify that as literary standard. It's like a really lower, diminished standard, but it is still poetry. And it's poetry that is accompanied also by music and resonance, frequency and amplitude, and all these other effects that do affect the soul. So they kind of put you in a certain state. And for many of those of us who do listen to these things, we don't realize the state that it puts us in, whether or not we understand the words or not. And many of these songs, I know I'm getting into a different topic right now, but since you asked, I think it's really important, because Adil had also asked me this question before about music, and I told him not to get too involved in it. It can really confuse you because it's a very vast topic. But just to caution people out there, because there's sorcery being done on you when you're listening to these, especially these new artists that really don't know what they're doing. Rap music and hip hop and all these things. There are some kinds of music that are good. They'll put you in a positive state. And music has been used in the past, even in therapy. But it's like a very niche category, a very small percentage of what's being produced for mass consumption today. And this is why when you look at things like musical concerts, or when you see people who are in, like a dance club or something like that, they're completely in a different state, and they don't realize it. They're in a state of euphoria, and a negative euphoria that is destructive, and prolonged exposure to that will even have physical manifestations. Like you'll see their facial features will be declined. There's no health to them. There's no nur. You will not see that human glow. Even forget the angelic glow that pious people would have. Their speech is lacking. It's destroyed. Some of them, their speech is even slurry. They have a loss of intelligence. Their intellective capacity is reduced greatly. Much of their vocabulary is limited to the language group that they're listening to. The songs, it's limited to that. And then their worldview is also dictated by the input of that language. So that is sorcery. That's witchcraft. It falls in the spectrum of witchcraft. That's what it is. Then you've got other kind of witchcraft that is much more serious than that. That's also serious, with prolonged exposure especially. But there's other kind of witchcraft that has a more tangible effect and a more immediate effect. Stuff that affects people's families, it affects relationships, it affects other things. There's a physical manifestation, people will fall sick, they'll have all these things happening to them. So the du'as that we are making, that you mentioned here now, and there are other du'as as well. Many of these will be also compiled in Ruqya. These are meant to protect against, not to protect in the material sense, but to protect in that other dimension. That's that soul, the dimension of the soul, right? the spiritual dimension that the jinn have got access to, through which they will have, they can do this harm upon you. That's where the protection comes in. It's important to maintain recitation of all these things, because one of the protecting mechanisms, you see, the most vulnerable state of affection that you can get affected in is during your sleep. That's when you're really vulnerable, because your body is at rest. So there's a layer of material protection there that Allah has granted that is lifted while you're asleep, and you are disconnected also from rational thought. And so it is very easy for shayateen to manipulate your thoughts in that state. And maintaining frequent recitation of some of these ayat is very important, because it enables you to recall these ayats in that sleep state also, that can come in useful in terms of protection. Anyway, this is a very different topic now. I'm going off track. But I hope that helps you answer that. I think it's very important that you pay attention to this. And inshallah, when we come to next week's session, I will go deeper into the inoculation theory that I was talking about, and also how it ties into sorcery. Because I think it's very interesting that they mentioned this way back then. They recognized it at that time. And I find it rather strange that I have not myself personally, I know Hassan mentioned it, but I know personally, I've not heard of any scholar really target this particular. I've heard of many of them talk about this in general, but I've not seen any scholar really go deeper into the study to see the effects that are taking place. So anyway, next week's discussion. You had a second question. No,
Yes,
sorry,
it's
go ahead.
like, they're trying to project what the verses of the Quran. They're trying to this inoculation theory. They're already trying to put into the minds of the people that what he is saying is a kind of sorcery. So they're trying to discredit the verses of the Quran by doing this, right?
Yes, in a sense, yes. What they are trying to do is to cause you to have doubt on it. As for you to, when you hear that, you're already primed beforehand to be either afraid of what it's going to do, or to counteract it by yourself, and build a kind of a resistance, an immunity against what the Quran will present to you as truth. That's the idea behind it.
And like some people do this, they pick and choose certain verses of the Quran, and they try to project their own projections of the interpretation to try and discredit the Quran as a whole, right?
That's actually a different category, and it's really amazing, because the Quran addresses that beforehand as well in Surah Al Imran, in the third ayah, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just said that, you know, those who have a perversion in their heart, they will pick and choose the ambiguous parts and then provide interpretations that suit what it is that they're trying to project. This actually is done by both the enemies of Islam as well as Muslims who want to, you know, build their own ideology that favors their own comfort insofar as religion is concerned. But they're doing that also on the other, by the enemies of Islam are doing that through sciences, mostly in the modern sense. So if you look at a lot of the scientific discoveries, you can actually challenge them using only the Quran, but not in the way that most of the scholars have tried to do. They've done it more from a romantic perspective, but you can actually do it from a purely rational angle. You can challenge many of the theories like relativity and what's this other one that they're trying to, the like string theory, for example, the creation theory, Big Bang theory. Many of these theories, evolutionary theory, all these can actually be countered using the Quran only, but from a rational and scientific methodology, not from an emotional standpoint. So many of the youth who are going into university and all this, for example, before having any exposure to the Quran in an intellectual manner, forget in terms of reciting and knowing the verses and all that, but really understanding what the Quran is saying in its core message as well as its extensions, its branches. They have got no exposure to that. They go into schools and universities. They start getting inoculated by these theories. By the time they're in a position of maturity in terms of intelligence, they then turn around and look at the Quran, and then they become immune to what the Quran is saying. Because you will hear this from a lot of these sort of, intellectual youth. What do they call themselves? They have a name for themselves. I don't know, Gen Z, something. They'll say, well, this is what we learned in school. They'll raise something like evolution. For example, evolution is something that you cannot study any science, any material natural science in school nowadays, in university and college, without evolution as a primary theory. And so the moment you start talking about creation, you see, they're already built an immunity against that. The moment you speak about anything else from the Quran, they've already built an immunity against that. That's part of the way this is being implemented in today's time.
Right. Jazakallah khairan. The second question,
that was question one.
Sorry, can I ask it or I'll give the others a chance?
No, go ahead.
Okay. My question is regarding personification and multiplication of idols. You mentioned about that. So when we talk to many people, especially polytheists, they agree with us on the principle that God is one. There is one supreme God. If we go beyond differences and come to the collective, so how would you warn us against being, thinking so nicely of the other person that you lose that sense of, you have that sense of danger when you realize that something is wrong? So you go so close to realizing that, okay, if you're giving, say, Christians a point like, okay, they believe in one God, we should not be judging. And the Hindus, they believe in one God, so we should not be judging and be nice. So in that process of being nice, you are, I mean, I personally was falling into that trap. How can I guard myself strictly against this kind of this is complete blasphemy and shirk, right? So how can we stay away from that kind of
Well, that's where logic becomes your most powerful tool, not just in terms of argumentation or counter argumentation, but insofar as also taking care of your thought, because logic functions on the premise of firaq, of differentiation, meaning you differentiate in the particulates without generalizing or overgeneralizing. You see, a lot of people, it requires effort, and part of it for many people, it's due to laziness. They just don't want to put the effort into thought. But if you give it thought, then there is, you'll be able to differentiate. Say, okay, we'll acknowledge the good, and then we'll target that which is not good. See, so I'll give you an example. Imam al-Ghazali said, here is a master of logic. He said, with regards to the Christians, he said, you know what? They can have their Bible. They can keep it. I don't find anything wrong with it. Imam al-Ghazali said that. But what he said is that the issue is in their interpretation of it. So let me let me explain to them how they should interpret these verses, and then they can keep the Bible and use it the way it is. So here is an individual who's not generalizing and saying, no, everything they say is false. Neither is he generalizing and saying everything is good. He's saying, no, look, these parts are accurate. These parts need to be rectified. So this is called firaq. This is called differentiation. And that's what the Quran is meant to do for you. That's what you're supposed to use it for. You're supposed to use it as a furqan, as a criterion to determine what is right, what is wrong, what is truth, what is falsehood. That's what you're supposed to use the Quran for. And this is what the scholars, this is the method they implemented. They use the Quran to examine, okay, this is what the Christians are saying. This and this is accurate, actually, according to the Quran. This and this is not accurate. So this is how they analyzed. They looked at Greek philosophies, for example, and say, okay, this is what Socrates is saying. This is accurate, this is not accurate, according to the Quran. You see, they look at Aristotle and say, okay, Aristotle is like this, and this is correct. This and this and this and this is not correct. This is how they did it. So this is the idea behind it, is don't generalize. And that's a fallacy in logic also. It's called hasty generalization. Or the all or nothing argument. It's either all bad or none of it is. It's either all good or none of it is good, right? Don't fall into that category. When you apply logic in both your study, your research, your argumentation, your compilation, apply it equally also in your thinking, because it will help you avoid fallacious arguments within, and then it will also help you differentiate. So, okay, there's something here that they're saying, there is some truth in here. If we can just find that piece, then we can differentiate that from all the other stuff that they're doing that is false, and then we can fix that. That's how you would do. This is, by the way, if you're in that position and you find yourself able to do that, that's a very powerful tool, because it helps you help the other person see the truth. And that alone can help somebody become Muslim. Because if you look at how many of the individuals, inshallah, will come to, I'm going to talk about al-Tufail ibn Amr next week from the Banu Daws. Inshallah, I'll talk about him tomorrow. I'm sorry, next week. And then we'll look at how this happened with him, how the Prophet was able to speak with him and he became Muslim. That differentiation will help, inshallah.
Right, Jazakallah khairan, Ustad. Sorry for taking up so much time.
It's okay. It's all right. It's all right. That was me, actually. I ended up giving a whole lecture to a question. No.
Okay, Sister Tahira.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, Ustad.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
Jazakallah for this another enlightening session and your time. I wanted to ask today something from the lecture. While you were mentioning about this polytheist religions, you also said Allah does not like us mocking their religion, right? So I'm not mocking. So personally, me, I don't mock, but sometimes I feel like when we have some one-to-one with these people, for example, in professional life, sometimes in past I have been asked when I have been for some interviews with some companies, they particularly say you should not be. Actually, I had mentioned some of my hobbies in resume. So that was one of the hobby was Islamic history. The moment they read it, the interviewer was like, so you should not be, are you going to read namaz over here, or keep something in your desk, like that? So I said, no, I'm not going to disturb your office timings, etc. But I just want to relate my point here. Being in India, I don't know how others feel, but every other corner you turn, you see this gigantic, ugly looking structures which they pray as gods. Okay, I don't tell them on their face, but yes, I feel inside, how can they pray to something which is so ugly looking, right? So is it wrong feeling?
No, it's not a wrong feeling. No, it's not. Don't feel guilty on that note. The fact that you're seeing the ugliness in it, that's a good sign, because in and of itself, it is ugly. The kind of mocking that is being referred to here is, like openly pointing and laughing at that individual, kind of the way that the mushrikeen were already doing to the Prophet at that time. It's similar to how some Muslims do this today also, like they'll make videos on YouTube and whatnot and start making fun of, oh, look at the Hindu, they do like this, and then they make fun of them in that sense. Or, and this happens a lot in the UK, I know this because I keep seeing these videos of Speaker's Corner, right? they stand up on the podium and they have this showdown between, and they say this is dawah, but it's not dawah. What you're doing is it's an ego battle that's taking place, and you're mocking the other person. So you're not actually doing dawah, because mockery immediately puts up a defense on the other side. And now the other person has got a reason to reject the message because of you. That's where it becomes very tricky, and that's why mockery is not appreciated at all in religion. Even in the former sense, as far as Christians were concerned, and even the Jews prior to that, at the time when they were a pious people, mockery was not something that was appreciated in terms of, laughing at the other person and saying, "Oh, you're worshiping you're protesting and prostrating, in front of a wooden stump that cannot even talk back to you." In that sense, like, you're making fun, you're making a joke out of it. In the modern sense, you'll find a lot of comedians that do this, and I don't like them. I don't like these stand-up comedians. They think they're very smart. They've got this attitude when they come on stage, like they're giving a joke, like they're really high and mighty for the fact that they can actually laugh about it. That kind of mockery is what's being referred to. And there are some who are even Muslim in that category.
Yeah. Right. So that was in my mind when you told, because people here, they pray for anything. They pray for monkeys. They pray towards snakes. And
Yeah.
in my heart, I feel, how can you do that? Some of them who are my friends, I have spoken to them. I told them, how can you say the world is so beautiful, etc. So somebody who has created this is, you can't even imagine his beauty. So how can you pray something which is so ugly looking? And they just be quiet. They don't have an answer to it. So I'm not mocking. So I thought, how is it that Allah does not allow this? Thank you for removing my confusion.
You
I
can
had
speak
one more
to them.
question.
Like, the idea here is that even when you speak to them, even when you raise a blunt point, right? Like you openly raise how can you worship a snake? That's a blunt, direct point that you're making across. The idea here is to do it with some respect. Not respect in terms of, I respect what you're doing, not in that sense, but in terms of, I respect who you are as a person, and I respect your intelligence as a person, as an individual.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm not attacking you or your personal belief. All I'm trying to do is to break down the argument here. And this, again, it comes back to using logic, because one of the biggest fallacies that is used by people far and wide is called the ad hominem attack, whereby rather than target the argument that is being made or the statement, people attack the other person, you see? And that becomes a problem. Now, it can be done through insult and it can be done through mockery, that attack. It's either tragedy or comedy, one of these two. So that's what you want to avoid, is to position them in such a way that, look, there's no enmity here between you and me. I'm just trying to understand why are you praying to this thing that looks like a monkey? I explain this to me. I'm mocking right now, astaghfirullah. But you get the point. You understand what I'm trying to say, right?
Yes. I just usually I don't say this. I go into a good conversation, and when they are, their logic is awakened, then I sometimes put this as a question. So people who are there are very good intellectual Hindus, but still they don't go, their intellectuality doesn't answer them. Yes, there is something beyond what we see. So that was my purpose to ask this. So I have one more question. Mashallah, the Quran, today the prophets, when you were explaining how prophet quoted from Surah Ghafir, exactly what the person had to hear. So Allah's timing of revealing the Quran, when it was in Lawh Mahfuz, and the way the evidence played out and the way it was revealed to Prophet ﷺ, then the way he used it to quote to people who exactly wanted to hear what they had to hear. So I just wanted to understand how Prophet technically, actually I read in Sheikh Imran's book, methodology to study the Quran. I didn't know before that. He has mentioned that Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did not even edited the Quranic script what he told his scribes even once, and yet the Quran was perfect when it was. So how did practically he achieved it? Can you give some?
How the Prophet achieved that?
So Quran came in various events, right? So it did not come in one chronological order, and when Quran was coming down, it was getting written down also. So how the ayahs were revealed, and how Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam ensured that each ayah is sitting in its right place before it is getting completed. How do you practically achieve
Yeah,
it?
so there's an explanation for that. And what used to happen is when he would receive revelation, Jibril alayhi salam, he would tell the Prophet where to keep the ayah, like where to position it. Like this goes in Baqarah, this goes in here, and this goes in here, and then
Like
overall
like
Go ahead.
today we have so many stationery, like we can put it in some Excel. I'm talking in modern
Oh,
understanding,
you're talking
modern
in terms
viewpoint.
of the
And back,
practicality of it,
yes,
in
yes,
terms of
and
the real,
back
yeah,
then,
the real world.
back
Yeah, okay,
then,
I understand.
yeah, back then, such a hard work at using
Yeah.
just papers and just positioning them. How was it done?
Well, you're actually referring here to a people whose superpower was and always has been acknowledged to be memory. The Arabs are the people who are recognized to have incredible memory, just amazing, phenomenal memory. It's like today compared to them, we could not match up to that. To an Arab, you could say something once, and he would remember it. And this has been, it's been demonstrated among Bedouins, not among like the most modern Arabs and city dwellers, but among Bedouins, they have an incredible memory. I'll give you an example. Imam al-Bukhari, for example, when Imam al-Bukhari wanted to, now Imam al-Bukhari he's not an Arab, but he did learn like Arabic. And one of the gifts of Arabic language in and of itself is it does increase your memory. By the way, for those who want to increase their memory, learning the Arabic language will help increase your memory. Imam al-Bukhari, when he wanted to sort of compile hadith, there were a whole bunch of scholars and whatnot. They sort of interviewed him for his qualification insofar as identifying him as a muhaddith. And so they all gathered and they were going to test him. So when they came to the gathering, the initial meet greet sort of whatnot, and he came in and he was meeting with all these scholars, and he would ask them, each of them, what's your name? And then he would say so and so, and then he would ask him, son of who? And he would say son of so and so. Son of who? Son of so and so. Son of who? So and so. So each scholar that he met, he asked them to tell him his lineage going back 7 generations for each of those scholars. And he met with all of them, and then he said, okay, I've met with all of you. Inshallah, tomorrow we can gather and then you guys can test me. So they gathered the next day, and he came in and he greeted each and every one of those scholars. Assalamu alaikum, so and so, son of so and so, son of so and so, son of so and so. Then the next person, Assalamu alaikum, Fulan Fulan ibn Fulan Fulan ibn Fulan Fulan ibn Fulan. He quoted each and every one of them. He mentioned them by name, going back 7 generations that they told him the previous day. And then he turned around and he asked them, and who am I? And they all looked at him and I said, you can teach hadith, it's fine. We're not going to test you after that, because of the incredible memory that he had. He just, so the Arabs are just amazing in that sense. When the revelation would come to them, those who are closest to the Prophet ﷺ, they would immediately memorize it. And then they would teach it to others who would immediately memorize it. And most of them, like, they say Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, his he actually memorized the Quran in chronological order, not the way the Mus'haf is compiled today. He memorized it in chronological order, and he had then later on written a Mus'haf that was lost. It was in chronological order. It's also said the same about Imam Ali, that he had a Mus'haf that was compiled in chronological order that also got lost. When the revelation would come down, Jibreel alayhi salam would tell the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this ayah goes, to Surah Baqarah, this ayah goes here, this ayah goes here, like that. Over time, by the time the Meccan phase had ended, many of the surahs had already been fully compiled in terms of their complete ayat set. Like they could be recited, even at that time, they could be recited as complete surahs. Some of the other surahs took longer to compile. I'll give you an example. Some actually were revealed partially in Mecca, some partially in Medina. One of those is Surah Al-Kahf. So partially it was revealed in Mecca, partially in Medina. And then after that, so he, the Prophet, as soon as he would receive one ayah or a group of ayah, sometimes he would receive several ayat at one go. Sometimes that moment, it would you would get 8, 9 ayats, and really long ones would come in at one go, and he would recite it immediately. He wouldn't delay it at all. He would recite it immediately. One of the qualifying markers of that, if you look, you will find many of the ayat that begin with qul. Now, qul is from qala. Qala yaqulu qul. And in grammar, that would be distinguished as fi'l madi, fi'l mudari, and then fi'l amr. So fi'l madi, which is qala, is past tense. Fi'l mudari, which is yaqulu, is like present future tense. So you got yaqulu, sayaqulu, much ahead in time. And then qul is the amr. So when somebody, like if I tell you qul, what I'm telling you is speak. I'm telling you to speak, right? And then so you would speak. This is one of the identifiers in, like the scholars looked at this and said that this is where his quality truly shines as a prophet and as a messenger. He did not alter a single word. He recited it word for word, including the command to recite or to say. Like when he's told, Qul huwa Allahu ahad, in general sense, an Arab would just simply say, huwa Allahu ahad. Right? Because the qul there is fi'l amr, meaning you, Muhammad, say, Huwa Allahu ahad. And so he would then turn back to his people and say, Huwa Allahu ahad. That's ideally how he would say, if you look at conversation. But the Quran does not abide by human rules. And the Prophet ﷺ gave, he did not speak from his own. Ma yantaqi anil hawa. He did not speak from his own thinking, his own desire. He gave word for word. So he said the qul as well, right? That's the where one of the markers of the Quran coming in an uncorrupted form, unaltered form, that's one of the distinguishing markers of it. Did I help? Did you understand that? How the compilation?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It shows Prophet ﷺ is a masterpiece. That's why he was chosen to give us this message.
Yeah.
One more question, Ustad, if you don't mind me.
Go ahead.
When you were answering Sister Hina, I wanted to just mention that the sorcery or the magic or the sihr, what we are talking here, is the same magic which had come down with Harut and Marut, right? So I was wondering how the Islamic message, how the Tawḥīd, the message of Tawḥīd was lost, what had come from prophets, but this this knowledge, this ilm, which was not supposed to be carried on, was still available and is still there today in this world. You got my point, right? So when these two angels came down, Harut and Marut. Prophet Solomon particularly told, and I think these angels also had told the people, we have come here as a test to you, and you're not supposed to carry on this knowledge. So this was not supposed to be saved or in anywhere, but somehow it was saved, and it is, you know, learned. It was saved and learned, and it carried out through generations. But what the messages these prophet brought, the Tawḥīd which this prophet brought, that was forgotten. However,
Right.
the
You're
truth was
wondering how
forgotten.
it is. You're wondering how it is that something like sorcery, you know, that has survived, but then something like as truth as Tawḥīd, that keeps on getting forgotten. Like you're wondering how
Yes,
that's
yes.
you know, like a possibility.
Yes, obviously it is Allah's plan, but people, I'm just wondering how exactly that which is so powerful, and which
Right.
you know, which you know, which casts spells on people, and it is so effective. It is still there,
Right.
but Tawheed is not there.
Okay, let's do this. I really like your question, and I don't want to butcher it. So, well, let's organize that session that we have been wanting to do on this particular topic for a very long time, right? So let's see. Let's pencil in a time with Adil. It'll probably have to be during the week. Maybe we can do it on Juma around the same time as we're doing right now. As I really like that question, but I don't want to butcher it. It has to do, to give you a nutshell, it has to do with the nature of this world. The very nature of this world is not a world of unification, or let's put it this way, of universality. Universality does not exist in this world. It exists in the higher domain. This is a world of particularity. And here in this world of particularity, corruption is more prominent than tranquility and peace. That's the nature of this domain. Is what the angels were arguing against in Surah Al-Baqarah. You know, أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَن يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا وَيَسْفِكُ, you know, fiha, there, corruption, there, bloodshed, there. It's the nature of this world. But Tawheed is not something that is materially manifested. There's no oneness in this domain. Everything is a particular entity. You can't do, this is why I said about Tawheed is not about quantity one. It is not about that. Neither is it about quality one. Because quantity, quality are natures of this world. Tawheed is dealing with something much, much higher. And that's why the scholars say, like Imam al-Laqani says in his Jawhar al-Tawheed, وَفُسِّرَ الْإِيمَانُ بِالتَّصْدِيقِ. Right? The iman is understood as something that is firm conviction in the heart, in that domain. Now, whether it should be done on the tongue or not, there's a difference of opinion on that. But itself, realization of Tawheed is done in the domain of the heart. Aqidah as a science is that which facilitates a kind of a tying, you know, a firmness to solidify one's understanding. The process of that is called i'tiqad. Now, i'tiqad is transcendence from rationality to that higher domain of understanding. So it's a deeper realization. And this is why over time, you will find, insofar as human beings in this world are concerned, there are ages in which you will find that Tawheed is almost lost in the world. But like to your question, sorcery is still prevalent. Why? Because it's the nature of the world. That's how it functions here. That's why sorcerers are very comfortable in this world. All the sorcery that's going on today, right? With the headquarters being Silicon Valley now, I think, is the headquarters. Before it used to be Washington. Then, you know, it went to New York, and then it went to Hollywood. Now it's Silicon Valley, right? That's the headquarters of sorcery now. They're very comfortable in this world. They can operate very well in this world. In Surah Al-Rum, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, they know the outward of this world very well because they're very comfortable here. They can measure it, they can dissect it, they can manipulate it. That's what sorcery is. Sorcery is manipulation. It is manipulation on an ethereal level, manipulation on an elemental level, manipulation thereby on a material level as the manifestation of it. So that's why it is very prevalent. It doesn't require too much to do sorcery, by the way. You can learn the arts. I'm not saying you do, but you can learn the arts from a master sorcerer. But in terms of actual just doing it, anyone can do it. Hasad is the smallest form or the easiest form, casting the evil eye. Just that mental manipulation cast on somebody is like a simpler way of doing sorcery. Twisting the words of something that is true is a form of sorcery. Engaging in a kind of a numerical manipulation, for example, the things that people do with the Qur'an, for instance, they look at Bismillah, then they do the mathematics there, right? And then they come up with a number 786 or something. That is sorcery. They don't believe it. They don't think it has an effect. It does have an effect because that's a manipulation. Any kind of manipulation of that which is true, any kind of manipulation in and of itself is a type of sorcery. Now, it may not have pronounced effects in terms of, the big things, but it's still a kind of sorcery. Numerology is sorcery. Alchemy was considered sorcery, especially because of its manipulative ability. Today, that alchemy has become chemistry. It's a little more distilled and more reduced in terms of its manipulation, targeted mostly towards materiality only. But it's still a form of sorcery, especially when it is applied to now extending that manipulation towards other aspects, like inducing, euphoric states or making drugs, for example, going into these psychedelic states. People who indulge in that also, things like intoxication, that's a kind of sorcery. Weed, smoking weed, and that's part of sorcery. You're actually committing sorcery because you're manipulating reality for yourself. Anyway, let's do a session on that because I have been promising it for a long time and we never actually got down to it. So pretty sure everybody has a lot of questions on that. Inshallah, I'm in the process of finishing my book. I published this particular topic is the topic that I started writing on because I underwent a personal experience, and after studying it with one of my teachers, I felt it necessary to write on the subject. But at the time, it's such a scary subject in and of itself that I didn't know how to write it. So I wrote it as a fiction, and that's when I started writing the book, The Amulets of Sihr. This was way back in 2018, and at that time I didn't, it's only later that I continued writing more and more on it, and ended up expanding it to an 8-volume or an 8-part series. So it's taken me a long time to put it all together. So inshallah, I'm in the process of finishing that. A lot of what you're asking me is actually embedded in there. So it'll be an easier way of understanding. Inshallah, when I finish it, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I pray He helps me finish the story. I think it's going to be very beneficial and entertaining also at the same time, hopefully.
Inshallah. Inshallah. Jazakallah khair, Ustad.
Okay, we have any more questions?
Yes, one last from Brother Roshan.
Yes, go ahead, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum, Ustad.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Thank you very much for this very short lecture today, but it's very, very important because it affects our human condition. And since this happened, at the time of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, when he was receiving the revelation, and we feel it nowadays the same way as they felt it then, right? So that concept of being mad, I guess you've just talked a little bit about it. Everybody was more interested in the sorcery aspect of it, because it's more, it affects everybody. You don't know if sorcery come before being mad or after being mad, right? So that concept of madmen was used to deny the truth, right? When Rasulullah was telling the people there about the Quran, about the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they were using him, that concept, to just deny him. But nowadays also it's used also to cover or to deny the evil that people do. And in many cases in the court of law, a lot of people commit crime and they get away by kind of find a reason that they were mad when they commit the crime, like they were insane, so they were not responsible then, right? And we see a lot of these cases in court. People get away with that, and you've pinpoint the root of it, because you say repetitive thoughts, or what we call waswasa, is not human, and is neither angelic, and you said it, and it is true. You're correct there, and that waswasa is from shaitan. So they're using this concept of madmen to give shaitan power in the court. So now a court is supposed to be, before we being judged before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like a judge will be judged like according to what Allah's law is, and he has to be very careful when he judges someone here, right? But now we see it being flipped, like they're letting the shaitan get away. That's what I would say. They're letting shaitan get away. But in your course on the knowledge of the nafs, you went in very detail on how that occurs, where you explain about the nafs, the ruh, the aql, the shahwa, and the ghadab. All of that, you went in very detail about this. Now, we see that happening in youth, and Brother Hassan mentioned that when people get affected by shaitan, they go into a mental condition, and that condition will cause them to do things that is not human. So I know there's that mental disease called manic depression. That doesn't come just at the beginning. It is a process to it, right? First you have like a physical breakdown of the body, where the body is not getting enough, nutriment to look after itself, and then you have the nervous breakdown, right? And then you start going into this, I don't know, you call it sorcery or something else, but you're doing things not knowing what you're doing, basically, right? You're not aware.
Well, you do know what you are doing. It's a kind of the awareness might be you see, like each case in this case will be different depending on how genuine it is. As the root cause, it might be you having done it to yourself, like you going into manic depression, like you said. Waswasa is very dangerous. There's scholars have actually written a lot on that. Waswasa is strongly cautioned against waswasa in the Quran as well. It's not waswasa that just the shaitan does. It's also waswasa that you yourself do to yourself. You do it to yourself. In that sense, you become your own shaitan. In English, we say something like, the demon within me, or my own demon. So waswasa can lead you to a kind of a pathway that really is not good. It's very, very dangerous. Like you're doing sihr on yourself, basically. That's what it would be. You're actually doing witchcraft on yourself. People, you might get into conflict with somebody, rather than let it go, you do a muttering to yourself. I've seen people do that. They'll just be talking to themselves against somebody else with whom they've had a conflict, and then that sort of waswasa then starts taking root. And the moment shaitan sees that, that's his greatest weapon, because that's his way in. You see, his greatest power is waswasa. So the moment you start doing waswasa to yourself, that's his way in, and then from there it's a snowballing effect. Now it affects the outward. In some cases it will affect the outward, the body, things like bodily deterioration, hallucinations will start arising from that. Lack of sleep is going to cause a different kind of then you start having permanent damage to, like, your nervous system, for instance, like you mentioned, to your neural systems. Like for some people, it will affect their long-term memory. For some people, it will affect their frontal lobe in terms of their cognitive ability. From that point is, you've now lost your rational capacity. And so any crime then committed becomes as a result of that. As far as the justice system is concerned, each domain country has got their own way of dealing with it. In the US, you can do something like an insanity plea. I think the same is applied to UK law, something similar in Canadian law as well. In other countries, they have a different way of handling it. So they all have their own way of dealing with the insanity. But you're right, in a sense, they are letting shaitan get away with it. Because but you can't put shaitan on trial. That's how evil ends up getting the spread. As far as Sharia is concerned, from the Sharia perspective, the action when committed in a state of insanity, that's not what's going to be held accountable. The qadi is responsible for dealing out fair judgment if it is established that the individual is, insane. There are ways to determine that from a Sharia perspective. Insofar as final judgment, which will take place on Yawm al-Qiyamah, that is in Allah's hands, because He alone knows what is truth and what is falsehood. So some people will pretend to be insane, and people have actually gotten away with it. There are documented cases that people have who are sane have gotten away with an insanity plea. Other people are genuinely affected in that sense. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will decide how that judgment will take place anyway. But we'll go into more detail, inshallah, next week. I'll summarize this argument by Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira. We'll go through it again next week. I'll go into a bit more detail, inshallah. Now, is there
Jazakallah khair, Ustaz.
any other question, Roshan bhai?
No, there's no other question. I know you're getting tired now. We'll wait for your lecture on sorcery and magic, and then that will be a very important lecture.
Inshallah. Let me see. I'll try and free up some time on my end, and then we'll make the arrangement with Adil, and then he can make an announcement of the date and time that everyone is able. I want to give everybody also some time to prepare their. I don't like lecturing so much because it's just me talking. But if you have like questions, then I can address specific points, inshallah. So we'll see how we can make that arrangement.
I think that's the best way to do it. Thank you.
Now, Adil, anyone and any other question?
No, sir, I think we can end the session.
Okay. سبحانك وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. بارك الله فيكم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. جزاكم الله خيرا. See everyone next week, inshallah.